always been cautious about picking up hitchhikers. It's something you learn living out in the middle of nowhere. But that night, on that desolate stretch of highway, I made an exception. The rain was coming down in sheets, my wipers struggling to keep up. I could barely see the road, my headlights illuminating only a few feet ahead. It felt like driving through a wall of water. That's when I saw him. A figure standing on the shoulder, drenched, his thumb sticking out in a plea for help. I hesitated, my fingers tightening on the wheel. There were no houses for miles, no other cars in sight. Just darkness and rain. Leaving him out there seemed cruel. I slowed down, pulling over a few feet ahead of him. He approached the passenger side, his movements slow, almost cautious. When he opened the door, I caught a glimpse of him under the dim interior light. Mid-30s, maybe a little older. His clothes were soaked, hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't say a word, just slid into the seat, shivering. "Rough night, huh?" I tried to keep my tone light. He nodded but didn't respond. His face was pale, eyes fixed straight ahead. I shrugged it off, figuring he was cold and tired. I turned up the heat, trying to make him more comfortable. We drove in silence for a while, the rain pounding against the windshield. I kept glancing at him out of the corner of my eye, uneasy with his silence. His posture was stiff, hands clasped tightly in his lap. I couldn't even hear him breathing. "Where are you headed?" I finally asked, trying to break the tension. His head turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine. They were dark, almost hollow, like he hadn't slept in days. His lips parted, but no sound came out. He looked away, his gaze returning to the road ahead. My chest tightened. Something about him felt off. I focused on the road, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, but growing stronger. A damp, musty odor, like old clothes left to rot. I glanced at him again, but he didn't seem to notice. His clothes were soaked, but that smell, it was wrong. It smelled like decay. I rolled down my window a crack, letting the cold, wet air in. My fingers gripped the wheel tighter, my pulse quickening. You all right, man? Need me to drop you somewhere?" He didn't respond. His head tilted slightly, his body rigid, his hands still clenched in his lap. I noticed dirt under his fingernails, dark and caked, as if he'd been digging. The smell grew stronger, the air thick with it. My stomach churned, the scent almost suffocating. I fought the urge to gag, my eyes watering. I turned to him, my patience wearing thin. "Look, I can't take you any further if you're not gonna..." He was staring at me, his head twisted at an unnatural angle, eyes wide and unblinking. His lips were stretched into a grin, too wide, too strained. My blood ran cold. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on the wet road. I looked away for a split second, my hands trembling on the wheel. When I turned back, he was gone. The passenger seat was empty, rainwater still pooled on the fabric. The door was closed, locked, as if no one had ever been there. But the smell lingered, heavy and rotten. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my breath ragged, heart pounding. I looked around, my headlights cutting through the rain, but the road was empty. No sign of him, no footprints, nothing. I tried convincing myself I imagined it, that I was just tired, but the damp stain on the seat was real. And that smell, it wouldn't go away. When I got home, it followed me. The scent of rot clung to my clothes, my car, my skin. I scrubbed and washed, but it wouldn't leave. I started seeing him in my rearview mirror, just a flash of his face, that twisted grin. It's been weeks, and I can still smell it. Sometimes I wake up and find dirt under my nails, dark and caked like I've been digging. I was driving through the desert at night, trying to make it to the next town before exhaustion got the better of me. The road was empty, stretching endlessly through the barren landscape. I hadn't seen another car for miles, and my eyes were growing heavy. When I saw the sign for a rest stop, I decided to pull over and take a break. The rest stop was small and isolated, just a single building with restrooms and a couple of vending machines. A flickering light in the parking lot cast eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. There were no other cars, no signs of life, just the cold, empty silence of the desert. I parked directly under the light, feeling slightly safer in its glow. As I got out of the car, a chill ran down my spine. The night air was heavy, still, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. I shook it off, blaming my fatigue. The restroom was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. I washed my face, hoping the cold water would wake me up. As I looked into the cracked mirror, I heard the faint creak of a door behind me. I turned around, but the hallway outside was empty. My nerves were getting the best of me. I took a deep breath and headed back to my car, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I approached the door, I heard a voice behind me. "Long drive, huh?" I jumped, my heart racing. A man was standing by the vending machines, his figure half hidden in shadow. He wore a dirty hoodie and jeans, his posture stiff, his head tilted slightly as he watched me. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't seen him anywhere near the building when I arrived. "Yeah, long drive," I managed to reply, forcing a casual tone. I reached for my car door, but he took a step closer. His movements were slow, deliberate, his eyes never leaving me. "Roads out here can be dangerous," he said, his voice low. "Not many people around. Not much help if you break down." His lips curled into a grin, but his eyes remained cold, empty. Something about his expression made my skin crawl. I tried to laugh it off. "Yeah, I'll keep that in mind." I turned to open my car door, but before I could get in, he spoke again. "Where you headed?" His tone was too casual, too familiar. I hesitated, keeping my answer vague. "Just passing through." His grin widened. "All alone?" My heart skipped a beat. I didn't like how he was looking at me, how his eyes seemed to study every move I made. "Meeting up with friends," I lied, forcing a smile. "They're expecting me soon." His expression didn't change. "That's so? Haven't seen anyone else around. Just you." I felt a knot form in my stomach. I tightened my grip on the car door handle. "Yeah, they're waiting for me up the road. Better get going." I opened the door, but before I could get inside, he moved closer, his body suddenly blocking my way. His eyes were wide, unblinking, his grin frozen. "You sure you don't need help? Be a shame if something happened out here. All alone." His voice was flat, emotionless. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I forced a laugh. "No, I'm good. Thanks." I slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door, locking it quickly. He stood there, just inches away from the window, his face expressionless, his eyes never leaving mine. I turned the key, the engine roaring to life. His smile widened as he watched me. He didn't move, didn't step back. I had to reverse to get away from him. As I pulled out of the parking space, he stood perfectly still, his head tilting slowly as he followed my car with his eyes. I didn't look back as I sped out of the rest stop, my hands trembling on the wheel. My mind was racing, replaying the encounter over and over. The way he moved, the way he spoke, the way his eyes never blinked. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see him standing by the side of the road, watching me. I drove until I reached the next town, my body tense, my heart still pounding. I pulled into a brightly lit gas station, relief washing over me at the sight of other people. I got out of the car, my legs shaky, my breath unsteady. As I walked to the restroom, I glanced at a bulletin board covered in missing person posters. Faces of people who had disappeared along this stretch of highway. My blood ran cold as I realized just how isolated that rest stop was. How easy it would be to vanish without a trace. I looked around, my eyes scanning the parking lot, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me with that empty grin. But he was nowhere to be seen. Just shadows and flickering lights. I never stopped at another rest stop after that. I kept driving, no matter how tired I was, no matter how long the road stretched ahead, because I knew somewhere out there he was still waiting. It was supposed to be a quick road trip, just a 3-hour drive to visit my parents. I took the interstate, hoping to avoid traffic. It was late, around 11 p.m., and the road was nearly empty. Just me and a few trucks scattered along the way. About an hour into the drive, I noticed headlights behind me. A pickup truck, keeping its distance at first. I didn't think much of it until it started getting closer, tailgating me. The high beams flashed, bright and blinding. I switched lanes to let them pass, but they stayed behind me, matching my speed. I sped up, annoyed, but the truck kept pace. Every time I changed lanes, it followed. I glanced at the rearview mirror, but the headlights were too bright to see the driver's face. My annoyance turned to unease. What did they want? I turned up the radio, trying to shake off the tension, but my eyes kept flicking to the mirror. The truck was still there, unwavering, the high beams cutting through the darkness. My skin prickled with unease. I decided to lose them, accelerating until my speedometer hit 90. But the truck followed, never falling behind. I took the next exit, tires screeching as I turned sharply. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them. But as I merged onto a side road, the headlights reappeared, distant but persistent. My pulse quickened. This wasn't a coincidence. They were following me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they were heading the same way. But then the high beams flashed again, blinding me. The truck sped up, tailgating so close I could see the outline of the driver's silhouette. Rigid, unmoving. I couldn't make out a face, just a shadow behind the wheel. Panic set in. I pulled out my phone, dialing 911, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. I glanced at the screen, my heart sinking. The road was desolate. No signs of civilization, just darkness stretching for miles. The truck swerved to the side, pulling up next to me. I looked over, and for a split second, I saw the driver. His face was pale, almost ghostly, eyes wide and unblinking. His mouth twisted into a grin, too wide, too unnatural. He mouthed something, his lips moving slowly, deliberately. I couldn't hear him, but I could feel the words crawling under my skin. He swerved toward me, his truck grazing the side of my car. Metal screeched against metal. I jerked the wheel, barely keeping control. He laughed, the sound muffled but echoing through the night. I slammed on the gas, my car lurching forward. I weaved between lanes, my heart pounding. The truck stayed with me, relentless, the driver flashing his high beams, swerving closer and closer. I could hear the scrape of metal as he sideswiped me again, trying to run me off the road. My vision blurred, panic clawing at my chest. I scanned the road, searching for an escape. Then I saw it. A rest stop up ahead, dim lights glowing in the distance. I sped toward it, tires skidding as I turned off the road. The truck followed, headlights blinding. I drove around the back of the building, killing my engine, sinking low in my seat. I watched as the truck pulled into the lot, idling under the flickering light. The driver stepped out, his movements jerky, unnatural. He stood there, staring at my car, his head tilted at an odd angle. His eyes gleamed, reflecting the light, empty and soulless. He took a step forward, then another, his body twitching as if struggling to stay upright. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me. He stopped in front of my car, his face inches from the windshield. His lips moved again, forming the same words, slow and deliberate. I couldn't hear him, but I understood. "I see you." He smiled, his mouth stretching impossibly wide, his eyes unblinking. Then he turned, walking back to his truck. He drove away, his taillights vanishing into the night. I waited until the sun began to rise before I dared to move. When I finally started my car, my hands were trembling, my body numb. As I pulled back onto the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those headlights again. The road was empty, but his words echoed in my head, chilling me to the bone. "I see you."